Hi friends, it's Mrs. Miller and we are back for chapter 17 of The Missing Manatee. Skeeter is all by himself back to the carcass of the missing manatee. Nobody knows where he is. He lied. He did not tell anyone where he was going, except Dirty Dan, who approaches. Chapter 17. Dirty Dan motored slowly across the open stretch of water towards where I sat in my skiff, frozen with panic and a weird sense that this couldn't really be happening. It seemed to take hours for him to reach me, hours during which my mind scrambled frantically for a way out and came up with nothing. Dan cut the engine at the right moment to allow his boat to glide alongside mine. The silence was complete. There wasn't the squawk of a bird, the buzz of an insect, or the splash of a fish in the shallow water. It was as if Dan and I were alone at the end of the world. Finally, he spoke. "Hello, Skeet." I didn't answer. My throat felt dry. So dry, I wasn't sure I could. "We need to talk." I still couldn't answer. After a moment, he gestured toward the manatee. "You couldn't let it go, could you?" "Had to keep after it." Then he nodded, saying, "I understand that. You're stubborn. It's the same stubbornness that made you keep trying until you caught that tarpon. I got it too." He smiled at me, his scar stretching in his brown leathery face, and he seemed so much like the old Dan. I almost smiled back. I caught myself and looked away. "But now we got ourselves in a situation, Skeet, and one of us is going to have to give in. I came out here to see who it was going to be, you or me." At last, I found my voice, though it came out kind of small and croaky. "What if I wouldn't give in? Are you going to kill me too?" Dan shook his head, and even though I knew better, I thought he looked genuinely sad. "I guess I can't blame you for thinking like that, Skeet, but it pains me all the same," he said. "I saw you talking to Blink this morning. He came home all nervous and upset again, and I knew I had to do something to stop all of this. I didn't come to hurt you. I came so nobody and nothing else gets hurt." He pointed to the manatee and made a weary face. "It's too late for him." "Yeah," I said, "thanks to you. Now you want me to keep quiet about it just so you don't have to answer for what you did." "In a way, yes." I couldn't believe it. He sure had nerve. I had to give him credit for that. Dan went on, "Because in a way, it really was my fault." "Oh, really?" I thought, almost letting loose a wild laugh. "Next, you're going to tell me, in another way, it was the manatee's fault for getting in the path of the bullet you shot at him." "I never should have let Blink shoot the gun," Dan said. "What? Blink? And a gun?" "But we were pretty far out in the boonies that morning, and there was nobody else around, and I thought, what harm could it do? He'd been after me for a long time to shoot the gun, saying he just wanted to try it, probably because of the things he sees on TV. Dan's voice trailed off for a second. "Anyway, there were a few of Blinky's old tennis balls rolling around the bottom of the boat, so I told Blinky to throw them out and he could shoot at them. I showed him the right way to hold the gun and how to work the safety, and told him never to point it at anyone. I told him he could shoot at 3 balls in the water. Just that one time," I said. Dan looked away, then looked back to me and said, "There are so many things he can't do, you know. I thought I could let him do this. Let him feel like a regular kid for once. It seemed harmless enough at the time." Dan was quiet for a minute, and I thought I could see how letting Blink shoot at some tennis balls might have sounded like an okay idea. Then Dan said, "So he was real careful, and he shot at one, then another, missing, you know, but laughing and getting a big kick out of the noise and the splash and all. And then, just as I threw the 3rd ball, this manatee's head popped up out of the water, and before I knew it, he had shot it." Dan paused and shrugged. I didn't say a word. I was so caught up in the story, picturing in my mind the dopey manatee's head coming up and Blink, taken by surprise, pulling the trigger before he even knew what he was doing, hitting the manatee in the head. Echoing my thoughts, Dan said, "I'm sure he didn't know what he was doing. At first, he was excited because the manatee drifted over near the boat and he could touch it. He didn't understand why it wasn't moving. When I told him it was dead, he got all worked up. You know how he does, crying and all. I still don't know if he understands that he shot it. No, I thought. You can't ever be sure. Not with Blink. And I didn't try to make him understand. It would only make things worse and him feel worse. Dan smiled weakly and said, I guess there is one good thing that came out of all this. He doesn't want to play with a gun anymore. I think I might have smiled back. Anyway, I was telling myself that it was an unfortunate accident. But it was an accident, and I couldn't see any good coming from Blink being hauled in and questioned or whatever might happen to him. I knew Earl would be good to him, but what if it wasn't Earl that I was dealing with? Then I thought about saying I shot it, but if I was hauled in, then where would Blink be? I'm all he's got. Yeah, I said, I know. Well, there's something you probably don't know, Skeet, and it made a difference in all this. He took off his hat, brushed his hand through his sweaty hair, and put the cap back on. I've got a little problem with Mr. Jack Daniels. At first, I didn't know who he was talking about. Then I remembered Jack Daniels whiskey. Butterfly juice? Was his butterfly milk. Ooh, butterfly milk, not juice. Oh, I said. There was a time when I used to get blind crazy drunk, get in fights, cause all kinds of big trouble. I drove my wives away and got myself a record with the police. Then one night, I got in a car accident when I was drunk as a skunk. Blink was in the car with me and he got banged up pretty good. Dan paused and looked down at his hands. They almost took him away from me after that. Ever since then, I try to drink just enough to keep it together, keeping my hands from shaking, you know? I didn't know, and I swallowed, not sure what to say. I thought about Dan sipping on the bottle all day in the boat, but not seeming drunk. I guess that was what he meant, but I'd have to ask Mac or Meemaw about it. So anyway, when I heard a boat coming that morning, all that stuff ran through my head. I guess I panicked thinking Blink would get in trouble for shooting the manatee, or else I'd be in trouble for letting him. Maybe they'd take him away from me for real this time. Maybe there'd be a hefty fine, and I don't have money for that. If I couldn't pay, maybe I'd go to jail. My past record wouldn't help. Maybe, well, like I said, I panicked. When I heard a boat coming, I pulled my boat up to the side channel and hid real quick. I never imagined it would be you, or that you'd find the body. But you did. And well, here we are. I thought of Blink, talking about how quiet he'd been in the boat. Now I knew what he was talking about, saying quiet while he and Dan hid from me. Piecing the rest together, I said, and then you went back and moved the body after I left to get Earl? Dan nodded. I didn't know for sure where you were going, or if you'd be coming back. But the way you were examining the head, I knew you'd figure out it was a shot. But Earl and I never saw you, I said. Then I realized, oh, you must have taken one of the smaller channels on your way back to the marina. That's why we didn't run into you on the river. He nodded again. And then neither of us said anything for a pretty long time. I was thinking about what Meemaw had said the morning about life getting complicated. And it seemed, as usual, that she was right. I was thinking about life giving you the down and dirty and never letting you go backwards, and how you didn't just mean me and Mac and Mom, but Dirty Dan and Blink too. I was thinking too about parents loving their kids more than anything, and how that might make them do all sorts of things, like Dan hid the manatee to protect Blink, or like Mom wanting real bad for me to have a life she thought would be better than hers, or like Mac moving to a trailer down the street so I didn't have to hear any more fighting. I was thinking that even though some people might say that Dirty Dan was wrong, maybe there was another way to look at it. I figured he was simply being the best father he could be to Blink. He knew, and that he knew how to be. He wasn't perfect, but so what? I was beginning to realize that nobody was. I was always making everybody into heroes or bad guys. But most people, even parents, were muddling around somewhere in the middle. Okay, I said to Dan. I give. He looked back at me, his scar stretching with his puzzled frown. I give, I repeated. You said one of us had to. He buried his face in his hands for a second, breathing a big sigh of relief. And only then did I realize how worried he'd been. He said, I was hoping if I explained you'd understand. I do. He nodded, staring off into the distance for a moment. Then, his glance indicating the manatee, he asked, should we try to bury this thing? I looked up at the sky and pointed to the vultures who were circling again, waiting. Let's leave it, I said. Vultures have to eat too, I guess. Very interesting how this has turned. Remember, when he realized that Dirty Dan had a piece in this, he looked at him as the bad guy. And now, he's no longer the bad guy. Not quite the hero either.